against me are crooked and impossible. Like I was born with a hole in my heart. It's an obstacle. I left to die by the doctors in the children's hospital, but I never lose hope. Success is psychological. The world is volatile and the street is my education, shaping the nation like the blueprint of a mason. While Shawshank record deals get you raped on occasion, so I'm focused on my economic situation. I'm like the little kids on TV that dig through the trash. I hustle regardless of the way you talk shit and laugh. A lot of niggas drop science, but they don't know the math, cause they mind is narrower than the righteous path. It's funny how on the block, niggas that kill you for cash, but never raise the gun to cry out freedom at last. The Cold War is over, but the world is still getting colder. Atlas walking through the projects with the hood on my shoulders. I would like to raise my children to grow to be soldiers, but then a general would decide when their life would be over. So I work hard until my personality split, like the Black Panthers into the Bloods and the Crips. They said I'd never be shit, but now I sit and reminisce like Yeshua Ben Yosef flipping through Genesis. Ignorance is venomous and it murders the soul, spreading like a virus, running rampant out of control. So if I should ever fall and get caught in a hustle, let them know that I died while I fought in the struggle. From the hood rats to rich kids lost in the bubbles, spray painted on the streets and in the subway tunnels. Write it down and remember that we never gave in. The mind of a child is where the revolution begins. So if the solution has never been to look in yourself, how is it that you expect to find it anywhere else? Immortal technique in the streets, back on the hustle, cause 3 strikes to get you life for stuffing cracks in a duffel. Upstate behind steel gates, attacked in a scuffle. Razor blade stuck on the side of pencils, hacked to your muscle. But the emptiness is what bleeds you to death when it cuts you. And it's the lawyers, not the inmates, scheming to fuck you, trying to fight the system from inside, eventually corrupt you. But that's what you get when you put a corporation above you. And it's the people that love you that seem to hurt you the most. Sometimes when they die, you find yourself cursing a ghost, but you make success, nobody delivers your fate. Sometimes you give and you take, since prehistoric vertebrates crawled out of the lakes. And that's the truth about life. Wanna do it to get in your car rims or your ice, cause even though we survived through the struggle that made us, we still look at ourselves through the eyes of people that hate us. But I'ma make it regardless of the trumped up charges and semi-automatic barrages that empty the cartridge. Post-traumatically scarred kids that try to be brave, cause niggas backstab each other just to try to get paid. Turn cannibal like knights during the crusades, afraid of responsibility, addicted to greed, beating a girl, purposefully losing the seed, as if we bound to the destiny we used to receive. So if I should ever fall and get caught in a hustle, let them know that I died while I fought in the struggle. From the hood rats to rich kids lost in the bubbles, spray painted on the streets and in the subway tunnels. Write it down and remember that we never gave in. The mind of a child is where the revolution begins. So if the solution has never been to look in yourself, how is it that you expect to find it anywhere else? I used to wonder why people don't believe in themselves, and then I saw the way they portrayed us to everyone else. They cursed us to only see the worst in ourselves, blind to the fact the whole time we were hurting ourselves. I used to wonder why people don't believe in themselves, and then I saw the way they portrayed us to everyone else. They cursed us to only see the worst in ourselves, blind to the fact the whole time we were hurting ourselves. I used to wonder, I used to wonder, I used to wonder.
Alrighty. Well, hello, Stephanie. Welcome to the channel here. And for everybody out there, this is Stephanie Winn. She is a licensed therapist, not currently practicing, who operates a podcast. And she's done a lot to tackle gender malpractice, what's been happening in the therapeutic field, working with parents of ROGD. She has a lot to say about what's going on in the state of the United States, the state of Oregon, my state particularly. But also not even that. It's spread to the point where it's international and it's causing quite a stir, and I feel like voices like Stephanie are important to the conversation. So Stephanie, welcome to the channel and thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me, Ty. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Thanks. Well, I guess to get started, there's so much we can go into. At this point, it's just kind of become blaringly obvious to everyone that something isn't right, that you can just go out into public, you can see the gender madness, you can see the politics, you can see the communism. I mean, here locally, even in Eugene, the one place in Eugene I had was a local bookstore, and it's just spray painted with gender rights and free Palestine and communist hammer and sickles. So it's completely prevalent. But when it comes to the terms of the kids and how they're suffering and how their needs aren't being addressed, we tend to take things like trauma and lived experience, and we throw it out the window, and we basically introduce these kids to this spirit of gender, which is equivalent to Jesus Christ, the way I see it. You accept it into your soul, and not only is it something that you take upon yourself and it's your salvation, but then there's this neo-religious element of now everybody else has to bow down around me. And it just kind of seems like we're all spiraling. So I don't know. Where do you think this is originating from, in terms of which institutions is it most prevalent in? What have you seen in the psychotherapy field? And yeah, I
Well,
mean, okay, got it.
I mean, that's part of why I'm speaking out. That's part of why I've paused on doing therapy to just focus on using the psychological insights and communication tools I've gained from 10 plus years in the field to help with what I see as one of the biggest crises of our time that my field helped create. So the mental health profession is absolutely culpable, the medical professions and big pharma, people who stand to profit from this, but the therapy profession, I think, has a lot to be ashamed of in terms of our role in things, because we've strayed so far from any reasonable standard of care of just how you approach human suffering. You know, the ability to see a human as a work in progress, as a developing person, as partly a product of their environment. Our ability to apply what we know about human nature to these young people who are confused about their gender, it's just so shameful how we've lost all of our tools and insights as a profession when it comes to this one issue. And I'm not saying that about all therapists. There's a lot of people who are wise, who are concerned about this. Many increasing numbers, public like myself, but also private, thinking about coming out, thinking about how best to serve in their roles.
Yeah, it's just become a nightmare, and for big pharma to get away with so much of this. What was the therapy field's relationship with big pharma prior to, let's say, I don't know what would be a good marker. We could say Donald Trump, COVID, the gender crisis. I feel like there's a few points where therapy started to go off kilter, but when do you think, in your estimation, they really started bowing down to big pharma and saying, we are basically do everything you ask, and listening to World Health Organization guidelines, which are just supposed to be recommendations, not rule set, that kind of thing?
Well, I want to answer with humility here, with recognition of what I know and don't know. I might not be the best person to ask this, but I'll give a little context for my qualification to answer this within a limited scope, which is I went to graduate school from 2010 to 2013. At that time, I believe I had one course on how to work with psychiatric providers. There are certain standards in terms of how care is coordinated. And the main thing about being a therapist working with people who might want to try psychiatric medications or might be on those medications is recognizing the limits of our scope of practice, because most therapists are, like me, master's level clinicians. So I have a master's degree in counseling psychology. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't have the ability to prescribe. So the license that I have, LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist, is one type of master's level clinician. You also have LCSW, so social workers, LPCs, professional counselors. So each of those license types has slightly different qualifications, but they're all about working one-on-one or in small groups with other human beings through primarily talking. We're not prescribers, any of us. So we're basically told, here's what you need to know about referring to psychiatric providers. Here's what you need to know about how various drugs that your patients might be on could affect them. Here's what you need to know about ruling out whether they might have some medical conditions that need to be screened for. So, for example, one proud moment that I can cite in my career as a therapist is a time that a young woman presented with what appeared to be symptoms of mania. So, potential diagnosis of bipolar disorder. But thankfully, I was trained well enough to know that those same symptoms could also be symptoms of hyperthyroid. And so I said, this sounds like it could be mania. It also sounds like it could be a thyroid condition. You need to see a medical doctor and make sure that's not what's going on here. And it turned out that was exactly what was going on. And after she got on thyroid medication, her mood stabilized. Though thankfully, she was not put on lithium or some other heavy drugs and diagnosed with bipolar, which can be a stigmatizing illness for life. So that's the sort of thing that we learned to do, right? To talk to people about basic lifestyle and the contributions of sleep, movement, exercise, things like that. To refer if they might be at risk of some kind of nutrient deficiency that might be causing some mental health symptoms, to refer to someone who could properly screen for those things. As far as big pharma was concerned, there just wasn't a whole lot of direct influence. It was more like we leave that to the psychiatrists or the mental health nurse practitioners or the doctors. And independently, each therapist in the privacy of their own thoughts was allowed to have opinions to be more or less enthusiastic about medications. So I personally tend to be less enthusiastic about people taking psychiatric drugs if it's something that can be avoided. I would, if I could wave a magic wand and improve someone's lifestyle, that's the type of change that I would go for first. But also, it's not my role to tell someone what kind of other medical professionals to work with. So something weird happened, though, in terms of how the therapy profession intersected with how the medical profession treats this idea of gender. Because in the past, if you were a therapist who thought that your patient might benefit from talking to a psychiatrist about depression or anxiety, you might not have any contact with that psychiatrist, or you might just get your patient's authorization to share their diagnosis and treatment plan, or share a little bit about the history of how severe this depression was, or what meds they told you they'd tried in the past. That was sort of the limitation of the coordination of care. With regard to how the medical field is treating gender, now therapists are asked to write letters. Therapists are asked to basically recommend these physical interventions with permanent consequences as a form of mental health treatment. And that's where things started to get really weird. So a little bit about my background here. I went to a level 1 training at a company that I worked for on so-called gender affirming care. And this is where they went over the whole, like, do you want a dead daughter or a living son myth and all of that kind of nonsense. And it felt weird and counterintuitive, but I was actually one of the early adopters because that's kind of the kind of person I am. I'm very open-minded, progressive kind of person by nature. So I was one of the early adopters. I'm also a little bit of an overachiever. And I think I had some personal insecurities at the time that sort of prompted me to feel like I had to take this on and practice this so-called gender affirmation. I never went on to the level 2 training, which we were encouraged to attend. In that level 2 training, I would have been taught to write these letters according to the WPATH standards of care at the time, which was, I believe, standard of care 7. It might have been 6, but I think it was 7 back at the time. This was like late 20-teens. And I even felt badly. I felt like I should go, but some part of me didn't want to go. And in retrospect, I'm glad that some part of me was holding back from going to this training because I thought I was just being lazy or something. But I would refer patients to another practitioner, just like I would refer patients to a psychiatrist if they wanted to talk to a psychiatrist. If they wanted to talk to someone who could write one of these letters, I would refer them. And then I would see these letters, and it was like this evaluation from a therapist that basically says, like, something about the nature of the person's gender dysphoria and that there's no reason that they shouldn't go ahead and have this so-called gender affirming care. And hindsight being 2020, looking back, I can recall that I felt a reservation about, like, how does a therapist really feel in good conscience that they can know for sure that something like getting an elective double mastectomy is really going to improve this person's quality of life. It was just kind of bewildering. But I think for a while I was operating from a standpoint of openness as well as the intellectual humility to assume that if this was being taught by professionals as a standard of care, that there must be good science behind it. Like, they must know something I don't know. But then I kept seeing, just case after case where there's obviously a lot more going on. Whether, we're talking about abuse, neglect, autism, homosexuality, everything that we talk about in gender critical discourse on podcasts like mine and on platforms like X, I was seeing that in my office and still going along with it until I actually heard about detransitioners. And I didn't even hear about them until 2020. I'd never heard the term. So the moment there was actual confirmation that, yes, there are people who go through with this and regret it, that's when I said, okay, maybe I can't assume that everyone going along with this knows something I don't know and that there is good science behind this. I need to understand better. And when I started listening to detransitioners' stories, I was shocked and I felt dismayed and horrified on behalf of my own profession that we had a hand in this because, we're the ones who are supposed to be helping people heal their traumas, not inflicting traumas on people. So, obviously I learned more about the concept of iatrogenic harm. And yeah, the whole thing has just been a big disaster and a major, as you were pointing out, step away from how we would normally handle things and the limits of our scope of practice as people who are not medical doctors.
Yeah, and it's wild to hear your perspective because you're coming from a more professional angle of how you were introduced to gender and all this. And for me, my story is I lived with my dad in a tattoo shop back when I was in high school, so I got to see a lot of crazy shit. And one of the things that him and my stepmom were really into was like taboo body modification. So like scarification, full body tattoos, like the Catman, Zombie Boy, all that type of stuff. So not even really knowing about transgenderism because there was never any trans kids in my school growing up. Maybe one, but I can't even be sure. But when I got into college, I went down to a community college down in Waco, Texas, and went to the LGBT club. And then they're like, oh yeah, pansexual and demisexual and trigender and 50 genders and all this. And then it just all hit me at once. And I'm sitting here like in the mindset of thinking about scarification and rituals and people who believe that they're a cat, so they tattoo themselves like a cat and go to the native tribes and do whisker implants. And back when that wasn't the norm and that was just kind of its own special little thing. And so for me to see all that, I was just like, oh, well, if all that's going on, then that makes sense. And then the future must look like a lot more of that going on because these individuals must have just been the first. And now society's going to see more of it. So I guess the future in my head, I imagine body modifications and transgenderism and full on tattoos. Like, I'm going to be a tattoo artist. If I get successful with it, I'd love a full face of tattoos. Personally, if I can make it in life and know that I can retire well enough, that's just me personally, but I need to like make sure I do it responsibly and don't fuck up my life. But now you see all these kids coming in with that attitude, and it just seems like we were just in this weird little, in everybody's own way, magical period of time where things were just kind of happening and gender was just kind of this thing. And like you said, just kind of going along with it, and it must be okay because everybody's kind of going with it and nobody's really questioning it, and they're coming at it with what is now we can see as pseudoscience, but that little era of time, I feel like, which for me personally would have been like 2016 to 2020, it's just weird how our understanding of human nature actually was around us, as opposed to now where psychiatrists like yourself and scientists and bioevolutionary psychologists or whatever the fuck out there are coming out with all their science, and now that's becoming more at the forefront. It's like we were really wrong about human nature and human psychology, because looking back at a lot of people like the Catman who tattooed himself like a cat, he committed suicide. He had no friends. He couldn't get a job. He was bumming off his friends. They eventually had to tell him, look, like, you're eating all our food. We're paying all your bills. We can't support you anymore. We can't even support kids. Like, but so many of these kids take the cooler aspects of it. They want to be different and they want to be unique and they want to be themselves, which you should be, but they have to make a show of it. They have to make a presentation with it. And it's a lot less, well, it's different for trans people as opposed to all that type of stuff, but it's also similar in a lot of ways to where it's soul seeking and willing to do whatever it takes to get that overall achievement.
Let's do a sort of an overlapping Venn diagram, compare and contrast between body modification of this type that you're describing and body modification of the gender. Obviously, you and I are different places, different people. You are covered in tattoos. You love tattoos. I had one tattoo when I was 16. So I was underage. I broke the law, and the tattoo artist broke the law to get a tattoo when I was 16, and I regretted it. I regretted it actually right after I got that tattoo, but it took me years to admit it and years more to decide to invest the time and money and pain in getting that removed. And I still have a little bit of scarring, but you wouldn't know unless you really looked for it. If you were looking at that location on my body, looking for a former tattoo, you would see it. Otherwise, you don't pick up on it. So I have that lived experience, so to speak, of having gone
Nice.
through some form of body modification myself, although something so much more minor than anything that anyone trans or detrans has put their bodies through. And still, it was painful and costly, a lot more painful and costly, mind you, to remove that tattoo later in order to not have to carry it around for life. But in terms of a compare and contrast thing, I mean, one thing is, I was the exception in being able to get a tattoo underground while, conveniently not addressing the fact of my age and not being carded. Most people, you have to be 18 to get a tattoo, and then it's on your own dime and at your own risk. It's
Yeah.
something you are free to do, and there is an industry set up around it. And that industry does have, I would think, certain safety protocols, just like a hair salon also has certain hygiene protocols to make sure they're not making people sick. But aside from honoring those safety and hygiene protocols, it is on your own dime, at your own risk. Nobody's touting it as a cure for mental illness. Nobody's pressuring insurance companies to pay for it. Nobody's arguing that it's life-saving. And also, I would like to believe that most people who get tattoos understand that that is affecting your choices and opportunities in life. There are certain career industries that you might not be able to go into with face tattoos. Being a tattoo artist, your options are open. Being a freelance podcaster, a self-employed creative, your options are open, but you probably can't expect to get a job working at a bank or a car dealership with tattoos on your face. And I think that's pretty widely understood. Nor is anyone expected to find your tattoos attractive if that's not their thing. No one is expected to praise you. Oh, your tattoos are so amazing, if that's not what they think. Whereas in the gender industry, it's expected that no one have any form of discrimination, not even that gut level instinct of feeling like maybe there's something off or there's something scary about a man, someone with the physical capacity to overpower and harm a woman, disguising himself as a woman. We're not allowed to feel alarm, disgust, or fear about that. And we're all expected to praise it, to view it as a beautiful thing, to glamorize it. And what's really unfortunate is that the fact that this is so glamorized in our culture is deceiving naive, innocent people, like young people on the autism spectrum who are really bad at reading social cues and honestly cannot tell the difference between people being polite and even, full-on preference falsification, or, in psychology, we have this term reaction formation, where someone's actually acting the opposite of how they feel inside, like pretending to like you when they're actually afraid of you. Like, there are autistic people who cannot tell the difference between people going along and acting nice and actually seeing you as the opposite sex and actually loving the fact that you're trans or wanting to date you. And they're, many of them, very sexually inexperienced, and they're spending all their time on these online forums where they're being grossly misled as to what their options will be in life for sexual and romantic relationships. I mean, if you look, for example, at this document called the Transmaxing Manifesto, have you seen this?
I've heard of it, but I haven't looked into it yet.
I haven't looked at the whole thing, but I think it's right there on page 1 of the Transmaxing Manifesto. All these reasons, and it's written basically by incels for incels, from what I can tell. And it's like, you will have more dating options as a woman. Okay. I mean, it's true that women have more dating options than men because most people are straight and women are choosier about men than men are about women. So yes, women have more dating options than men. Does that mean that trans women have more dating options than they would if they had stayed men?
That's just sexism at that point. They're like, all women get this, all men get this. Therefore, if I step into another pair of shoes, I'll get this. And it's like the tattooing thing, talking about modification to get into communities. People get tattoos all the time to fit in. People have done it. Federal agents get tattoos to blend in with gangsters. Like, fan bases, people be covered in this shit. And it doesn't matter like how many like superhero or whatever tattoos you may have on you, a lot of these people you learn are fucking predators. And just because they like shit that may pertain a lot to kids and the youth and younger generation, it doesn't really have shit to say for their behavior. So it's like people will do whatever they can to get whatever fix they want. And like there's a lot of that I relate to, like the tattoo. I think I got this before the Suicide Squad movie even dropped. I thought it was going to be the greatest DC movie of all time. It is one of the worst DC movies of all time. And I'm sitting here like sometimes I've gotten better with it as I've gotten more confident, but there's times I'll be out in public and I'll just like put my coat over my hands. I'm like, man, I don't want anybody asking, because one thing that people always ask, oh, do the thing from the movie, put your hand over your mouth and laugh. And I'm just like, this is not what I fucking signed up for at all. And like, as far as social expectations, being gay and graduating high school in 2015, what do most gay men do when they get out of high school in about that era? We go straight to Grindr. It's just throwing yourself around all over town, not going on any actual dates, not getting any freaking relationships, just one night of satisfaction, then you're done, and you don't even remember it because you're coked out and blacked out on Jack Daniels. That's what the norm is for this generation. Like, it's drugs and alcohol and sex and internet. And it feeds everything.
I'm actually really curious about that, because by most accounts, young people are having less sex than they were a generation ago. And I'm not sure on drugs. I'm not sure how this generation's drug use compares to previous generations. I'll tell you anecdotally what I've observed, because what I do, as you mentioned in the beginning, the main thing I do now is talk to parents of youth with, we'll conveniently call it ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria, the term coined in 2018 by Lisa Littman. Now, there's a lot of variation in terms of, how long and how, passionately these youth have been identifying as whatever. But I talk to parents of trans-identified young people, and many of them are very sexually inexperienced, and many of them are, it's interesting, they're so risk averse and cautious. I mean, there's a few wild child stories I've heard, yes, of trans-identified people using lots of drugs. The most common situation I've heard of is trans-identified young men on spironolactone and estradiol who are smoking lots of weed. That's the main one that I hear. But a lot of these young people, they don't even drink. They've never been drunk before in their lives. And they're not experimenting, they're not getting out there. And I think there are a lot of parents who find themselves in the situation of thinking that they never would have predicted that they would actually rather their kid be going out and partying and having at least some life experience of the sort of variety that you had when you were young and you made it out okay. I mean, I'm not saying there's no risk involved in partying. Yes, there are risks involved in having casual sex and in using drugs. I'm not recommending that as a life path. But a certain amount of experimentation and risk-taking is, we considered until recently a normal part of late adolescence and early adulthood. And what's weird is that a lot of these trans-identified youth are just spending all their time online, and they don't have those social experiences. And so I wonder about the role of like alcohol, for example, is disinhibiting. And some of these kids come across as so tightly wound up, and some of them detest the idea of alcohol because it seems to me like, if I'm reading between the lines correctly, they're really afraid to let loose. They are afraid to get in touch with whatever they might discover underneath the surface. So it's just weird. I'm not recommending casual sex, drugs, and alcohol, but it's just weird to notice that this generation that's paradoxically considering doing something so life-altering as these permanent forms of body modification that have these tremendous impacts for their future health, fertility, and lifespan are so risk-averse when it comes to the risks we normally associate with that phase of life.
That's a fair analysis, and I like to paint things chronologically, and I see what you're saying 100% because a lot of the kids around here, I've seen that with a lot of friends who have family members. I've had a lot of conversations. That is a very, very common thing with being risk adverse. And part of me wonders because my generation was so out there and we were going hard and doing all the drugs and doing all the drinking and all this crazy stuff. Part of me is wondering if that is something that these kids saw and they're just like, oh, hell no, because my generation went off on some crazy shit. I mean, there's a lot of people that still haven't grown up. I'm 27 years old. I know people who are my age and older who are still stuck in the phase that they were in 18 because there's a lot of my generation is infantilized at this point. They want to stay in the party phase. And part of me wonders if these kids are looking at that and being like, it's not it for me. That's one thing I noticed with anyone who's ever claimed they're asexual is they're like, we see the party scene, we see everyone just going out and throwing themselves, we see Grindr, we see all these things, and we just don't want to do it. So part of me is wondering if that has an effect on the youth, because my theory is like things like the drug war and making it last this long and making it taboo while simultaneously putting it out into the culture through our music, through our media, through, I mean, you could go to the store and buy a meth pipe in places where meth is illegal. Like it's a culture. And part of me thinks that the drug war has a lot to do with what we're seeing, because in some form of faction, drugs seem to be playing a part. Even with weed, heavy smoking weed, that can disassociate you. A lot of times I'm smoking weed, I just want to get zonked the hell out and not be in my thoughts. But also simultaneously, it can get you trapped in your thoughts. And I don't know, a lot of these kids just seem to be smoking weed younger and younger and younger. And as someone who started smoking weed when I was like maybe 16, 17, and seeing the effects it has on me as a 27-year-old as a daily smoker, it's got to be taking its toll, not only generationally, but the younger you go. And then like, what's it going to look like when their kids start smoking, you know, and what's that going to look like a generation down the line from then? Like when it comes to marijuana, like I've been smoking weed while I've been sitting here talking, like I'm not opposed to marijuana, but I think we had a lot of lies put out about marijuana or things like ketamine. You know, everyone's like, oh, it's therapeutic. Like it's like candy here, anything you can possibly want, and you can get it through Discord, you can get it through Snapchat. I've seen it with my own eyes. There's literal menus where it's like click send, done, it'll drop off at your house. That's freaky.
Well,
And a lot of it's fentanyl.
I think we might be having a blind men and elephant moment here, because I think you see a different part of the puzzle than I see. Because the people I spend most of my days talking to are typically middle class parents from, affluent, stable communities whose kids are adopting a trans identity in part because of these social justice narratives that otherwise paint them as at the top of the hierarchy, as the oppressor, the bad guy that you don't want to be. And I think these youth that I'm thinking of have not had exposure to that party scene, but you have an interesting vantage point given the culture that you are a part of, the world that you're seeing around you, where I think you're right, probably in your observations of the young people around you, that some of them have seen what excessive drug use can do to people. And I'm glad that you are, you seem okay for someone who's been smoking weed for this long developmental period. But we do know that, you at 27 as a male, your brain has just now reached its state of full maturity. And we know that the earlier, before the brain reaches that state of full maturity, the earlier someone starts smoking weed, the higher their risk of problems like psychosis, for example. That's not something you want to mess around with.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that one from experience. A lot of it was psychedelic induced, but smoking weed on top, like, I don't know. My drug adventures have taken me a lot of places, and it's taken a lot of mental healing, and weed's just the poison I've chosen at this point. But I think part of me worries is like the kids don't talk to the parents about these types of things. Like I know that the parents don't talk to these types of things. I'm not talking about your parents and your kids in particular, but just on average, kids aren't talking to their parents about sex or drugs or honestly anything at this point. They're shut down in a room with their cell phone. Their parents are old fashioned. You know, one thing I'm trying to spend some time thinking about, and one thing I want to talk to Daryl Davis when I talk to him about, is we spend so much time arguing ideologically, but this the generational divide where kids don't feel comfortable talking to adults or the older generation because they are the oppressors or they are racist or they are bigots. that's creating some friction, because how can they possibly invite their parents or their family members into a world if that world excludes them? You know, because it's like a lot of time I was on drugs. My mom thought I was up here doing good, working for a minute, and I was railing cocaine, blacked out on the side of the street, you know, sleeping out in the rain because I couldn't walk home because my knees were all scraped up, bloody, getting into fights. Like, I was on some tweaker shit. My mama didn't know. And I know a lot of the kids I was hanging out with too. They're like, we don't talk to our parents. They're all racist. They're all bigots. And that's what scares
Yeah,
me, is
that's
the lack of communication, maybe.
that's part of why I specialize in communication. And I've recently called myself on social media, I call myself an intergenerational translator. Um,
I
some
like
some
that.
people some people underestimate my age. They think I'm younger than I am. I'm almost 40, and
Hey,
I'm I'm one of those elder millennials that's right between the Gen X and, or excuse me, Gen Z and Alpha on the one side, Gen X and Boomers on the other. And so, you know, sometimes I'm talking to 60-year-olds about their 20-year-olds, and I'm explaining what queer means nowadays. And I'm explaining, I mean, I'm thinking of what are some terms I've explained recently. I've explained thirst trap. I've explained, you know, the idea of transmaxing and sad fishing
I haven't
and
even heard of that one.
the
I don't even want
IKEA
to know.
the IKEA shark, explaining various memes, both literal, you know, picture memes, but also cultural notions. Um, and there is a huge generational divide, and so many of the parents I talk to really just regret underestimating the dangers of the internet. And I mean, I talk to men who have been married 30, 40 years who are just now learning what the differences between the porn that their sons are seeing and the porn that they grew up with, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, I've noticed this type of shit with my little sister too, because she's on YouTube and we were down visiting and she's showing me all these videos on her YouTube. And, you know, she's like a little second, third grader, I think, at this point, and shit was just going over her head. It was just inappropriate humor and drugs and murder. And I just kind of looked at my dad. I'm like, you know what your fucking daughter's looking at right now? And I had to sit down and explain, because I was just like, this isn't even the same internet I had. I mean, sure, we had Two Girls, One Cup. We had a dude putting a mason jar up his ass. We had some crazy shit. But this is some next level, like, that, again, that type of thing, that type of weird taboo thing becomes the norm, to where everything is just meant for shock value. And, you know, I kind of get treated like an honorary old person a lot of the time, because technologically retarded. I bitch anytime anybody wants to have me download an app. I throw a fit at the bank because I just want to get in and out. Stop trying to sign me up for every goddamn service. And I don't do social media anymore. But the longer I'm off social media, the more that disconnect is happening, to where people are just saying crazy phrases and things that I have no understanding of. And being out of the loop like that, it's weird. It's so weird. And to see people talking in memes, especially now that I'm out of it, because I noticed it when I was in Facebook, specifically at the protest, everything was a mantra or a meme or a Facebook slogan. But now it's just like birds chirping at each other, but how different birds have different chirps. Like, everybody's in their own little chamber and they're communicating themselves in all these weird ways. And I'm just like, I have no clue what any of this shit means anymore.
Well, speaking of which, let me ask you, as a gay man, how do you feel hearing that our fourth grader has been using the term slay?
So it's not good, but this is my context growing up. So I grew up in West Texas in Odessa, which is very, very ghetto, very dangerous. I think it's in the top 10 dangerous cities in the United States for a long time there. It's an oil field town. So whenever the oil field crashes, gangs and crime shoot up. When I was in third grade, we had a girl named Foxy who got hit on a drug bust. She would always brag about sleeping with every boy on the football team. The boys on the football teams would brag about sleeping with her. Kids were
Third
bringing
grade?
knives. Yeah, kids were bringing knives to school. There were guns in the backpacks. Nobody shot at each other then. That's something to evaluate. But that was the kind of environment I grew up with. So, like, this shit's bad, but also with my elementary school raising, like, my parents got me the hell out of there and we went to North Texas, where it's way more suburb, way more level. But I saw a lot of crazy shit as a kid, to where, you know, I see things like school shootings now, to where I said, I was back in school where kids were bringing guns. Kids were taking guns to the high school. There was like, we had Odessa High School and Permian High School, and different kids that went to different schools were parts of different gangs, not high school related gangs, but different factions. So different families would put their kids in different schools as to avoid trouble. Kids would get shot over like people losing the football game. So I guess my childhood and things I was seeing are just kind of now coming out to the rest of America. Because now that I'm looking at it, it's just kind of grew up in the Middle East at its worst. And now the rest of America is falling prey to it. So I guess I just feel so jaded and used to it to where, yeah, it's just kind of like, and I think of that in terms of Odessa. It's like, well, it's a town that got fucked over, that relied purely on fossil fuels. Nobody got taken care of. Everyone got ravenously political. Drugs took over everything, and can't go there without someone having a gun waving in your face. And that's just kind of what seems like is what's going to happen to the rest of America. That's what I'm noticing here in Oregon. I keep talking to my husband. I'm like, yeah, this is turning into Odessa, Texas. This is why crime rates are going up. This is why people are shooting each other. This is what happens when people feel disenfranchised and their needs aren't met. They turn to extremism. They turn to gangs. They turn to cults. They turn to whatever community or culture they can to escape from the bullshit. And things just get worse and everybody just goes off. Like when I was a kid, I think the blood and Crip dispute was already over, but there were still Bloods and Crips in my neighborhood. Like I was in a blood neighborhood. I got in fights with the little gangbanger kids all the time. Kids in middle school that were slinging dope in the alleyways, chasing me down with knives. I had a fun life.
You got a lot of stories to tell.
Yeah, I got a podcast for it now. So, but now that's just America's reality, though, because no one wanted to listen to towns like that. No one wanted to listen to places like Detroit or Flint, Michigan, or the places that fell apart. They said, that's just over there. That'll never happen to me. How'd that work out, you know?
And now you see things happening all over Oregon that you're concerned about.
Yeah. And like, it's to the point where I live in a neighborhood and we have libertarian militias, we have far-right militias, we have neo-Nazis, we have people with pride flags, we have people with Trump signs, we have people with Biden signs, all within this neighborhood. I'm not as scared as the neo-Nazis as I am with the communists. Because what I see them do when I'm driving by, they're prepping, they're getting their shit ready, they're going out camping. They're not going to be in the fucking neighborhoods when this shit goes down. They're not looking to fuck with my gay ass. And, you know, I feel like I'm combating the far right by tampering the far left. And what I'm doing, I'm trying to bring that down a little bit, because the more that gets amplified, the more the far right gets aggravated. But I see these things in my neighborhood. We have cops moving in all over the neighborhood. We've had patrols. We've had drones. We have a whirlybird that'll come by once a week that'll fly over our houses, over our backyard, to where I can like see the pilot, like 1984 style. Like, there's some weird shit happening in my neighborhood. Tell me why I'm more scared of Antifa than the far right now. Like, what I'm seeing happen to my friends with this isolation, with this disenfranchisement, with their mental health needs not being met, with not feeling safe in their communities. And a lot of this, and a lot of their problems are faults of their own. It's their drug use, it's their alcohol abuse, it's shattered families. We're seeing an influx of mommy and daddy issues out the fucking ass. That's most of what Antifa is. But it's becoming what I grew up with. It's becoming really familiar. I hear gunshots more regularly now. You know, people ain't shooting their guns out in the field. Like, you know, people are getting kidnapped. Like, people don't feel safe walking in the streets. People are getting chased down with knives. I work at a restaurant where we've had 2 butcher knives pulled, one from behind the bar, and one someone ditched I think it was like I don't know how much money they spent, but they didn't pay for one of their meals. They went next door to the Target, came back with a butcher knife. Both times the cops came, nothing happened. And also I got in trouble for calling the cops because my managers wouldn't do jack shit. And this state is falling apart. And
you got in trouble for calling the cops.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because they had to come in early and fill out a report, and you should have trusted the manager's judgment with it. And I was like, he was walking around with a butcher knife. Y'all sat him next to a group of, like, a family, like, of 10 with children. You wouldn't let me fucking bash the dude over the skull. I like my job, so I called the cops. And people are getting punished for raising awareness at their jobs. You know, safety matters keep happening, and the rules, like they were explaining to me like the social media policy and all the rules in place for the company, and I told them I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit, and neither should anybody. Why are we being forced to risk our safety for the sake of a company that doesn't give a shit about us? So you have my entire generation feeling that way, and feeling like the only way they can go out and enact change is if they punch a cop in the face. It's getting wild. And when I talk to people down in Texas, they're like, you're in a different world. I'm like, yeah, at this point, I just call it communist Oregon. This is not, it's not even the same Oregon I moved to. And I've only lived here like 8 or 9 years. Like, it used to be a magical place where you could talk to anybody about anything. I used to buy packs of smokes and joints, and I would just walk around and offer them to the homeless people and talk with them for an hour or two and just bullshit. You know, basically doing what I'm doing right now on podcasting, just under a bridge. And it was fun, and I didn't feel scared. Now I feel a little bit scared, and everybody else does too. So, you know, we're talking about kids not going out and living life. A lot of kids are scared of this environment because they recognize it. A lot of parents are scared to send their kids out into it. And I think even if they want to, they're like, well, better they're here than getting out there getting kidnapped or raped or molested. Or it's just so common to hear these stories on a daily basis from so many different people. Like, I could go to cashier anywhere and I'll hear a fucking horror story about something happening locally. But where's the help? There is no help. There's only promises of a better future, a diverse future, which, meanwhile, I'm speaking with my mother, who's an elementary school teacher down in Texas. They have the diversity. They're getting all the migrants. They're speaking all the different languages, and they're not sitting there touting it like, oh, good for us. We're champions of diversity. They're like, no, we got all these migrant students from this country, so we're incorporating their culture into our school in this way, and we're learning their language, and we got new programs, and yada, yada, yada. Immigrants don't want to come to Oregon anymore. Like, most of the immigrants we're getting now are being forced out from the South because of the whole border dispute happening. So now we're seeing an influx of that too, along with the crime that comes with it. I'm just scared for the state.
Well, it certainly sounds like you've seen some pretty wild things. You talk about people's mental health needs not being met in all of this, but I don't know how they could be met when people have adopted such wild belief systems, as the ones espoused by Antifa, for example. And I mean, I'm not in that role anymore because I'm not a therapist with an unknown presence. I'm not that sort of blank slate, if you will, who could just work with anybody. Now that the cat's out of the bag, I have a reputation. I have hundreds of hours of content, maybe thousands at this point, that I've created that anybody could look at. Even when I do go back to providing psychotherapy, it'll be, it will come, there will be an informed consent process that involved knowing that, yes, I have said all these things publicly, so you have to be okay with that. Otherwise, it might be disruptive to your therapeutic process to find out where I stand on certain issues. But even if I were just an anonymous therapist who was pretty good at keeping my opinions to myself within that role, which I was one day in the past. Actually, I was for 10 years in the past. Well, it depends. It gradually changed as I entered the world of podcasting. Anyway, my point is, how can a therapist who's doing their best to be neutral and unbiased and to support people mentally respond to someone with such radical beliefs? I don't know that a person can hold such radical beliefs and address their mental health issues at the same time, because I think the beliefs themselves are a huge source of paranoia, of grandiosity, righteousness, polarization, division, justification for rejecting and judging your fellow human beings, in many cases your own family members. So I think the beliefs themselves are incredibly divisive and not conducive to what we know it takes to be in good mental health. So it seems kind of like a runaway train situation with this radicalization. I wouldn't know how a therapist could help people in that position because I think a lot of people with those types of beliefs are, they expect their therapist to share their worldview. And then where does that therapy lead, right? If there's this enmeshment and agreement going on between the therapist and the patient about the evils of capitalism and the bigotry of one's own family and the evilness of everyone who doesn't think and vote and act politically exactly as you do, where's that going to lead?
And this is really why on my channel I'm hoping to eventually find other people like me who are in Antifa to come and speak out, because it's like the detransitioners. You hear 1,000 stories and you're just like, they're all unique to be sure, but it's like they're all the same. There's just so much sameness. There's so many similarities that I've seen what happened to me happen with other people. And I think for people who came out on the other side, if they could just come out and speak out on what that did to them, a lot of what's coming out in therapy, like this language of PTSD and anxiety, just basically fetishizing mental health. A lot of the people I knew who are at their worst, who I'm scared will not come back, who could have come back, who I hope will come back, use PTSD and anxiety and mental health as a shield. It's not they went out and punched a cop or waved a baton or popped a tire. That's not the source of their trouble. It's the PTSD caused by the situation, by the ineptitude of the government, and by the police. It's not the fact that they went out there, did something they shouldn't have done, didn't get the results they wanted. And ultimately, what we need to realize with things like Black Lives Matter and Antifa, this was all a show. It was all a faux rebellion. It was all meant to get Donald Trump, which isn't fucking working. Good job with that. He's going to be our next president. I'm voting for his ass. This is ridiculous. It was all a smear campaign. They used us as a LARPing paramilitary arm to drive fear into local businesses, into different industries, into different institutions, into the corporations, into tech, because everyone feared reprisal. Like when everyone put a Black Lives Matter sign over their doors during the riots, all that was lamb's blood. That was just let the angel of death pass me by. They like the Black Lives Matter signs only started coming up after the windows started getting smashed, where they're like, hey, don't fuck with me, don't fuck with me, don't fuck with me. That was the power of Antifa. They put fear into these communities, the far left, any of these groups. It's going jihad now. They have a million different names. Like I say, it's not one Antifa. All of Antifa hates each other, so they created 50 million fucking Antifas. It's you got to realize that these organizations do not have our best interest at heart, and that they prey on mental health or lack thereof. They, in this language, it's like a cage, because whenever they're like, I have PTSD, I'm traumatized. One of the girls who was one of the top people that I went there with, who she was of Jewish heritage and she was feeling really scared by the whole situation, I watched her fall apart, and now she's non-binary, beating up people in the streets. So it's like, because she doesn't feel like a woman after that, because that's masculine energy that was put out. So now and I'm seeing it with so many other different people, and just the callousness and the coldness of it all it's weird, but I know, given the numbers and what I've seen, that there's thousands of people out there in this country, and I'm willing to bet thousands, even if it's just 2,000 or 3,000 people who have the exact same experience as me, who need to say something. Like, I watched an ex-Antifa member video yesterday, and it was nice. He's like, yeah, I walked away from it, and they're communist, and I'm voting for Donald Trump now, and yada, yada, yada. Good talk, good 2 or 3 minutes. That's really not enough. I feel like the Antifa crowd, the ex-members, are the next wave that needs to happen, because until it comes from us, all y'all can do is speculate and live in fear and wonder, what are they up to? What are they plotting? When the reality is, it's a bunch of broken kids who are keeping each other down, who, when your friend can't leave the house because they're so scared a cop's going to recognize them, or someone's going to pull up in a KKK hood and beat their ass because they've gotten to that level of psychosis and paranoia. Well, what a good friend would do in that instance is not question your mental health, not psychoanalyze, and let me go get a pack of Trulies for you up the road, so you can stay in this dark hole and keep yourself drinking to death. And I've seen it happen with dozens of people at this point. I use a few as an example, but I meet these people. I've gone to jobs and I've met former Antifa members. I've met them in the streets. I've met active members. And it's a very particular kind of person that the public needs to learn about, and they need to learn about it now, particularly with all this jihadist intifada shit happening with the colleges. Because don't expect any graduations next year. Don't expect any graduations the year after that. Don't expect any graduation any year the year after that. Until this shit is solved and people like me can come out and are willing, I'm willing to have a cop knock on my door and ask me questions if they want. Fine, come do it. Because I would rather be thrown in fucking jail knowing that I said my fucking piece than letting all this fall to shit. But we're the missing piece of the puzzle, I feel like, and we need more.
It sounds like there's something you want the world to know about Antifa. Do you want to put that into bullet points?
It's so much. And I would just really encourage people to go to my YouTube channel and to dissect, because it takes hours. It takes hours. I'm trying to spill everything I know. I've met so many different people, so many different stories, but it's a cult. It's a cult that makes you think you're going to save the LGBT community and Black people that ultimately just destroys them. You know, George Floyd's family didn't get any money. Trayvon Martin's family didn't get no fucking money. They bought mansions. They bought mansions, and then they encouraged more riots. And now Hamas is putting out statements with Black Lives Matter, and they're like, yeah, that George Floyd shit was fucked up. You guys should be mad about that. George Floyd wasn't murdered, guys. Go watch the full footage, the Fall of Minneapolis documentary. We were not given the full footage of the George Floyd tape until like a year ago. And I think it was about the time that Derek Chauvin got stabbed. There was talks about it, but the news never put out, here is the 20 or 30 minutes of the George Floyd incident, the thing that's burning our country down. Let's watch it in full. They never did that. They hid it. And then Derek Chauvin got stabbed in fucking prison for not even putting his knee on the man's neck. There was no knee on his neck. It was a restraining move that was in the fucking police rule book. And these were things I was never willing to accept. I called people Nazis for this. But we create martyrs. And it's a cult without leaders. They basically base it on the people who die for the movement. Like at Stop Cop City, they had someone who identified as it get killed because they were all perching out in the woods like vigilantes trying to hunt police officers, tying down old white men in their cars and setting the car on fire. So the little bastard got shot. More cities burned because of that. Portland had riots because of that. And they try to make a whole thing about pronouns and respect his pronouns. And then the news would say itself. So when people die for this cause and they go out into the streets and something happens, it doesn't matter what the real story is. What matters is the story they create, what they're able to clip together. You know, like Next Benedict turned out to be a bullshit fucking story. Here, what's his name? We have a guy here, his name will come to me in a moment, but he pulled a gun out at a high school in Eugene, and he fired a shot at the cop right in front of the school. He was trying to go and get his kid, who he didn't. I'll put up Charles Landeros. He was in a custody dispute, and I think he didn't want his kid going to the school. So he shows up to the school with a gun. Cop tries to shoot him, or tries to stop him. He pulls his gun, pulls the trigger, and they shoot him. The parents go to the school and have a rally because they're concerned about what happened. Antifa shows up to that and says this was a political assassination. They tried to assassinate one of our Black Lives Matter leaders or members. He was really popular in the community, I guess. This was as I was getting out of Antifa, so I didn't learn about it till later. There's a mural for this man in downtown Eugene that his wife has come out and publicly said, what the fuck? My ex-husband was a monster. He pulled a gun out of school. He put children in danger. Why did you paint a mural for him? And he's sitting there with a megaphone. I think he's got his fist in the air, and it's a whole political thing. It doesn't matter what the truth is.
They pick the worst martyrs, don't they? I mean, George Floyd was a terrible person. He abused women, abused drugs, was in and out of prison his whole life. They picked him as a martyr. They picked this guy as a martyr. So what do you know about the connection between Antifa and Hamas? Because it sounds like you know something.
So on my channel, I have a video. It's Israel and Palestine, various perspectives, something like that. And I took information from the official Hamas website, which if you type Hamas into Google, apparently it just pops up at the top of the list. And there's basically a step-by-step plan for getting into the American education system and getting into the institutions and using social causes to pray. This is something I've only been versing myself in the last year or two, because it seemed, before even the college stuff broke out, it seemed like it was going to go jihad, because I try to look at things chronologically and in patterns, like gender. It didn't start with gender. It started with black people. It started with Wiggers. It started with white people with no connection to the hood, who took what they believed African Americans to be. They took their music, they took the chains, they took the white beaters, they took the baggy pants, and they projected that image onto themselves, and they became Wiggers. And then, you know, you had metrosexuality, which was more respectful, but then straight people were looking at gays being like, oh, you know, the gays, they dress kind of nice. We're going to do that. Put on some cologne, get a little crew cut, do what we're going to do. Nothing wrong with that. But then we start going into stuff like gender, which is kind of a religious replacement that's not working out. So what happens when the religious replacement doesn't work out? Well, then you go out and you try out religion. And with just step by step where things seem to be going, it seems like they don't want to accept the Christian God, they want to accept the Muslim God. Like that little non-binary girl who's just like, oh yeah, Allah doesn't see gender. I have a Quran, damn near every page is fucking gendered. Like, it's a very, very gendered, structured, hierarchical system, but they just want to be the opponents of the Christians. They want to be the opponents of the United States of America, which from Antifa, a lot of the reason people are in Antifa, it's not because of George Floyd or Donald Trump. It's because of the Middle East. It's because of the fact we've been in an endless series of wars. That's what gets talked about a lot, is the fact, oh, we're in Afghanistan, now we're in Iraq, now we're going to Iran. Like, when you're in an endless series of wars and you feel like there's no way out, and you feel like your country is just expanded to the point where you have military bases all over the planet, which is basically our number one producer of fucking climate change, is all the fucking oxygen or all the shit they're putting out into there all over the fucking planet. Like, people feel hopeless, and it adds to that hopelessness and that isolation. But now that shit's getting worse in the Middle East, now that we're going to Iran, now that the Russian subs are right outside Florida, that existentialism has grown to where, kill the Christians. I mean, look what happened at the Nashville church shooting. Kill those kids, those little white devils. Because what more do you have to lose at this point? You could die tomorrow. That fear was there even with George Floyd and Donald Trump, but now it's real. You could die tomorrow, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows we can get a nuke dropped on our head tomorrow. So people have less fucks to give. That's why we're seeing more stories of people just standing out in the streets. It's just a lazy mass shooting at this point. They're standing by a highway, just bop, bop, bop. Like, people just don't give a shit. That one might have been in Detroit. There was one in particular where I saw the footage of. I'll upload it and clip it in with the channel. But it's something I've been seeing a couple more times too, where the violence is just getting lazy. It's just people twacked out and doing shit and flailing and throwing themselves at the world. But also with that, they're going to start getting organized. You have all these shooters, you have all these radical extremists, you have these people willing to take up arms. Somebody's going to come in and tell these kids, hey, you don't have to do this alone. And Hamas seems to be, at least for now, I don't think they're going to fill that role. I don't think these kids are going to join Hamas. I think we're going to see some new factions emerge. We're going to see some new outgrowth from Antifa, from Black Lives Matter. And it's going to become very new. It's going to become very outwardly communistic. It's going to, I mean, we're already starting to see it. It's praising the military action of taking back colonial land. So in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, this is what decolonizing looks like, huh? And they want it. They really, really, really want it. There's a lot of kids that really want it. And they need to realize what they're going to lose. Because a lot of these kids, as much as they may want to kill their parents, love their parents. As much as they may want to burn down their towns, love their towns. And we all feel it when the wildfires come. We all feel it when the natural disasters come. I feel like that's what God's trying to tell us, because in those moments we fucking humble ourselves. 3 weeks I had without power back in January during the winter storm. I came back to that. I was on YouTube less. I was on podcasts less. I feel a little less invested in shit. And I was just like, huh, you know, life's a fragile fucking thing. And when the wildfires are burning, no one's out there rioting. Everyone's trying to get their dogs out and trying to get the last bit of food and trying to escape the smoke. So it's like, this is going to create more of that. This is going to create war and famine and death. Get ready for a future of hellfires and missiles. This is what it's been invited. And that's not me saying it. That's Joe Biden, because they put a goddamn fucking sub outside of Florida with nuclear weapons and simultaneously said, this is our terms of agreement for ending the war. And what did Joe Biden do? He signed a goddamn 10-year security agreement with Ukraine. We're locked in. So for people listening to this, do you really want to make it worse, or do you want to make it better? That's really what it is at the end of the day. This is a very existential thing. This is become life or death. This is if people in Antifa and the far left and former neo-Nazis, jihadists, all these extremist groups, if people don't come out and start showing some balls and running their mouth, more people are going to die. The more you run your mouth, the less people die. That's kind of how I'm putting it in my head, at least as a reassuring thought, because let's not bullshit ourselves that this is World War III. The government can lie to us all they want, but Sweden and Europe and the UK and the Middle East, China, they're telling their people, get the food ready, get the ammo ready, stock up. What are they telling us to do? Fight. Spend your money on drugs, spend your money on alcohol, consume, barely have any gas in your tank to fucking leave if this shit goes down. Destroy your mental health. Black Lives Matter and Antifa, people who would have stood up to what's happening at the colleges right now and these jihadists, they were taken out of the fight by the faux rebellion that was based around the death of George Floyd. People who would have been there saying, hey, these are Jewish students and we know where this fucking goes. Don't fuck with them. You can have your rights and you can have your say, but this kill the Jew shit has to fucking end. All those kids are at home drunk right now, or committing suicide, or addicted to drugs, not doing a goddamn thing with their time when they could be speaking out. But that's what it was meant to do. That took everybody out of the fight. The youth of America that had that fire's gone. It's been replaced. And a lot of them are fooling themselves that this shit isn't even happening, because as long as you don't pay attention, it's not real. But it's real, and they need to be out there. Like that's kind of the message of my channel, which I didn't expect going into it, is kind of feeling like some of these people should be reactivated. Tear up your old flags, put down your old ways, heal your family struggles, heal your mind, heal your body and soul, and get back out there. And don't fight, don't engage in violence, don't combat the police, but tell people, like, try to have a conversation, counter this. Like, they're going after the Jews. That's what this is. And I get Israel's committing war crimes and genocide, 100%. That doesn't change our situation here in America, nor does our situation in America change anything that's going to happen over there. But we can at least try to save each other. But I think we should probably wrap it up. I do have to do another interview here in the next 2 minutes, but do you have any closing thoughts or anything you'd like to say before we go?
No, that was a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I think you're working on finding the heart of what it is that you have to say, and that you have a lot of insight into some very particular pockets of humanity. And I think your message will become more powerful as you practice honing it and clarifying it, not just for the people who know what you're talking about, but also for the people who don't. Like, I think, when you're able to break it down into, like, item number 1 that you need to know about Antifa. Boom. Item number 2. That's going to be a really powerful speech. And I think this is how you get there, right? Through talking to people like me and working on your YouTube channel. And because I know you're just at the beginning. I wish you much success in your endeavors.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing the time with me today. And yeah, for everybody out there, make sure you hit like and subscribe. I hate to do it, but y'all don't. So go ahead and do that. And yeah, y'all have a great day. Peace and love.
Yeah, I've been high and low, I've been sober, I've been fighting, searching for my love in all the wrong places.